In November of 1941, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in America paid 2 doctors to drill holes into his daughter's skull and scrape away her brain tissue while she was awake. She was 23 years old. When it was over, she couldn't walk. She couldn't speak. And then she simply vanished, erased so completely that for 20 years most of her own family had no idea where she was. Most people know the Kennedys as Camelot, America's golden dynasty of presidents, senators, and tragic heroes. But behind the perfect smiles was a daughter who was deliberately cut out of the family's story, sacrificed to protect a political brand. Her name was Rosemary Kennedy, and the man who destroyed her would one day face a twist of fate so precise, so chillingly fitting, that it almost defies belief. Rosemary Kennedy's tragedy didn't begin with a scalpel. It began at the very moment of her birth, in a bedroom in Brookline, Massachusetts, on September 13, 1918. Her mother, Rose Kennedy, went into labor while the family's physician, Dr. Good, was delayed, reportedly held up tending to victims of the Spanish flu epidemic that was ravaging Boston. The nurse attending Rose was perfectly capable of delivering the baby herself, but she had strict instructions. The doctor must be present. The doctor collected his fee only if he performed the delivery. So the nurse made a decision that would echo across the rest of the century. She ordered Rose Kennedy to hold her legs closed. And when the baby's head began to emerge anyway, the nurse physically pushed it back into the birth canal and held it there for 2 hours. 2 hours without adequate oxygen. 2 hours that quietly, invisibly, damaged the brain of a newborn girl before she had taken her first breath. When Dr. Good finally arrived and delivered the baby, Rosemary looked perfect, a beautiful, healthy infant, the 3rd child and first daughter of Joseph and Rose Kennedy. Nobody in that room understood what had just been done to her. It would take years for the damage to reveal itself. And when it did, it would collide head-on with a family that had no tolerance for imperfection. Because the Kennedys weren't just a family. They were a project. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. was a ruthless businessman. Banking, Hollywood, the stock market. A man amassing a fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars and nursing an ambition far bigger than money. Joe Kennedy intended to put his sons in the White House. Every child was an asset. Every dinner table was a debate arena. Every touch football game was a competition, and losing was practically a moral failure. Into this pressure cooker of a household came Rosemary, a sweet, affectionate little girl who couldn't keep up. The delays surfaced early. Rosemary was slow to crawl, slow to walk, slow to speak. She struggled to read and write while her brothers Joe Jr. and Jack tore through their lessons. She couldn't steer a sled or manage the family sailboat races. Her IQ would later be estimated at somewhere between 60 and 70. Today, she would be recognized as a person with an intellectual disability and given support. In the 1920s, in a family obsessed with excellence, she was treated as a problem to be managed. And above all, hidden. Rose Kennedy shuffled her daughter through school after school, tutor after tutor, always searching for some program that could fix her, always moving her along before anyone noticed she wasn't progressing. Rosemary spent her childhood being quietly passed from institution to institution, writing home letters full of love and longing, desperate to make her parents proud. And for one brief, shining moment, she did. In 1938, Joe Sr. was appointed United States Ambassador to Great Britain, and the whole family sailed for London. That May, 19-year-old Rosemary was presented at Buckingham Palace before King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, one of the highest honors available to a young society woman. She practiced her curtsy for hours. On the night itself, dressed in a white gown, she performed it almost flawlessly. She stumbled slightly, but recovered, and the king and queen gave no reaction. The press photographed her beaming beside her sister, Kathleen, and called her beautiful. For a girl who had spent her whole life failing the Kennedy standard, it was the pinnacle. Rosemary Kennedy had done it. She had been, for one evening, exactly what her family wanted her to be. It was the high point of her entire life. She just didn't know it yet, and neither did anyone else. Because within 3 years, the girl who curtsied for the King of England would be strapped to an operating table. World War II sent the Kennedys home to America, and the return shattered whatever fragile stability Rosemary had found. In England, she had thrived at a quiet convent school, where she helped teach young children. Back in the States, she was placed in a convent in Washington, D.C., and she began to unravel. Now, in her early 20s, Rosemary was changing. The sweet, eager-to-please girl was having violent mood swings, tantrums, outbursts where she hit and kicked the people around her. Some historians suggest the storms of adult emotions and desires in a woman given no tools to understand them and no freedom to express them were simply overwhelming her. Whatever the cause, one behavior terrified her father above all the rest. Rosemary started sneaking out of the convent at night. The nuns would find her missing and search the streets. Where she went and what she did has never been fully established. But Joe Kennedy was convinced she was meeting men, and he was haunted by one scenario above all: pregnancy. An illegitimate child, a scandal. In 1941, Joe's second son, Jack, the future President John F. Kennedy, was already being groomed for political office. In Joe's cold calculus, a disabled daughter roaming the streets at night wasn't a young woman in crisis. She was a threat to the entire Kennedy enterprise. And Joe Kennedy did not tolerate threats. He began quietly searching for a way to make the problem go away, permanently. What he found was one of the most notorious procedures in the history of medicine. It was called the prefrontal lobotomy, and its most enthusiastic American salesman was a neurologist named Dr. Walter Freeman. Freeman was ambitious, theatrical, and utterly convinced he could cure mental disturbance with a blade. He and his surgical partner, Dr. James Watts, had been performing lobotomies for only a few years, severing connections in the brain's frontal lobes to pacify difficult patients. The results were erratic at best and catastrophic at worst, and the medical community knew it. The American Medical Association had warned against the procedure. Reportedly, when Joe's daughter Kathleen looked into it for her father, the message that came back from a journalist investigating the surgery was blunt. The results were terrifying. Rose Kennedy would later maintain that she was never told the full truth of what was planned, though some historians suspect she understood more than she ever admitted, and simply looked away. What is certain is this: Joe Kennedy went ahead anyway. He didn't consult his daughter. By most accounts, he concealed the decision from nearly everyone. In November 1941, he delivered 23-year-old Rosemary to George Washington University Hospital and handed her over to the butcher doctor. What happened in that operating room was documented years later in Freeman and Watts's own accounts, and it is one of the most disturbing scenes in American medical history. Rosemary was given only a mild tranquilizer. She was kept awake. That was the method. The doctors needed her conscious so they could measure, in real time, how much of her brain they were destroying. Watts drilled holes into her skull and inserted an instrument resembling a blunt spatula into her frontal lobes. And while he cut, Freeman talked to her. He asked her to recite the Lord's Prayer, to sing God Bless America, to count backward. As long as Rosemary could speak, they kept cutting. Swipe after swipe through living brain tissue, listening as her words began to slur, then stumble, then fall apart. They stopped only when she became incoherent. When the voice they were using as a measuring gauge finally went silent. They had planned to calm her down. Instead, they had all but destroyed her. The lobotomy was a catastrophic failure. Even by the grim standards of a procedure that failed constantly, Rosemary emerged unable to walk, unable to speak more than fragments, incontinent, partially paralyzed on one side, staring blankly at the people around her. The young woman who had curtsied before the King of England, who had danced at London balls, who wrote affectionate letters home begging her father to be proud of her. She was gone. Doctors assessed her mental capacity as that of a toddler, roughly a 2-year-old. It would take months of therapy for her to regain even partial movement in one arm. She would walk, eventually, with a limp and speak only in scattered, garbled words for the rest of her life. Joe Kennedy's response to this horror was not remorse. It was containment. His daughter had gone into the hospital as a liability. She came out as evidence, so he made her disappear. Rosemary was immediately transferred to Craig House, a private psychiatric facility north of New York City. Expensive, exclusive, and above all, discreet. There she stayed for roughly 7 years, cut off from nearly everyone she had ever known. And then, in 1949, she was moved again, this time for good, to St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Jefferson, Wisconsin, a Catholic institution nearly 1,000 miles from the family compound in Hyannisport. Joe paid to have a private house built for her on the grounds, where she lived with the nuns who cared for her. The locals came to know the quiet, dark-haired woman as simply Rosie. What almost none of them knew was that she was the sister of the man whose face was about to be on the cover of every magazine in America. And here is the part that is genuinely hard to comprehend. Joe Kennedy never visited her, not once. For the rest of his life, the man who had ordered the surgery never looked at what he had done. He sent checks. He arranged her care through intermediaries. Rose Kennedy, by most accounts, didn't visit her daughter for 2 decades. The Kennedy children were told a shifting story. That Rosemary was reclusive, that she had chosen a quiet religious life, that she was teaching at a school in the Midwest and preferred to be left alone. A living woman was converted into a polite fiction. Meanwhile, the family she'd been erased from ascended to heights no American family had reached before. In 1946, Jack won a seat in Congress. In 1952, the Senate. When reporters asked about the sister nobody ever saw, the campaign machine smoothed it over. During the 1960 presidential race, the family suggested Rosemary was simply too busy with her work to appear. In November 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected President of the United States, the youngest man ever elected to the office, the shining prince of a picture-perfect family. Camelot was born, and in a small house on the grounds of a Wisconsin institution. The president's sister shuffled through her days, unable to say her brother's name clearly. A living secret at the heart of the most photographed family on earth. The father had won. His son was president. The problem was buried. Joe Kennedy stood at the absolute summit of his life's ambition. The patriarch of American royalty, the architect who had gambled everything and taken the White House itself. He had 13 months left. Because everything Joe Kennedy had built his empire to prevent, helplessness, silence, the loss of control, was coming for him. And when it arrived, it would come in a form so precise that it reads less like coincidence and more like a sentence being carried out. On December 19, 1961, at the age of 73, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. collapsed at Palm Beach after a round of golf. It was a massive stroke. He survived it, and that was the cruelest part. The stroke left him paralyzed down his right side and robbed him of the ability to speak. The condition is called aphasia. His mind reportedly remained largely intact, but the connection between thought and speech was severed. Almost the only word he could still say was, "No," which he repeated over and over, in strings, unable to make anyone understand what he actually meant. The most powerful private citizen in America, the man whose phone calls moved markets and made presidents, was now trapped inside his own body, unable to walk unassisted, unable to speak, wheeled from room to room while other people decided everything for him. 20 years, almost to the month, after he paid 2 doctors to take those exact things from his daughter. The man who ordered the cutting of Rosemary's brain until she could no longer speak, spent the final 8 years of his own life unable to speak. The father, whose daughter had to relearn how to move her own limbs, now had to be lifted, carried, and wheeled. He lived like that until 1969, dying at 81, having watched, fully aware, and utterly mute, as two of his sons, Jack and Bobby, were assassinated in front of the entire world. Whatever he understood about what he had done to Rosemary, whatever he felt in those 8 silent years, he was never able to say. There's a grim symmetry in that. History's most infamous stage father ended exactly as he had left his own daughter, present, breathing, and voiceless. And it was only when Joe Kennedy fell silent that Rosemary was finally found. With the patriarch incapacitated, the wall he had built around his daughter began to crumble. Rose Kennedy traveled to Wisconsin's and saw her daughter for what is believed to be the first time in roughly 20 years. The reunion was devastating. Reportedly, Rosemary reacted to her mother with agitation and fury, and it's not hard to imagine why. The Kennedy siblings, one by one, learned the truth of where their sister was and what had been done to her. For most of them, it was a revelation, though here, recent research complicates the family legend. In her 2015 biography, historian Kate Clifford Larson, drawing on newly opened Kennedy letters, diaries, and school records, found evidence that JFK had quietly visited Rosemary back in 1958, during a campaign swing through Wisconsin. If so, the future president had known. He had seen his sister, kept the secret, and carried it with him into the White House. But one sibling refused to let the secret simply continue. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, Rosemary's younger sister, and by many accounts the sibling who loved her most fiercely, stepped into the silence her father left behind. In 1962, Eunice did something no Kennedy had ever done. She told the public the truth, or at least part of it. In an article for the Saturday Evening Post, she revealed that her sister was intellectually disabled, shattering the family's decades of cover stories. It was a landmark moment. A family at the pinnacle of American power admitting what millions of families had been shamed into hiding. But even this confession carried a lie inside it. Eunice attributed Rosemary's condition entirely to her birth. The lobotomy, the thing that had actually taken her sister's speech and mobility, went unmentioned. That secret would hold for decades more. What Eunice did next, though, changed the world. She began hosting a summer day camp for children with intellectual disabilities in her own backyard. That camp grew and grew until in 1968 it became the Special Olympics. Today a global movement serving millions of athletes in nearly every country on Earth. Its founding is usually told as a simple story of compassion. The darker, truer version is that it was born from a buried family wound. A sister's love, and arguably a family's guilt for the girl they had allowed to be destroyed. Every medal ever hung around a Special Olympian's neck traces back, in a straight line, to a woman hidden in Wisconsin. And Rosemary herself, she outlived nearly all of them. She outlived Joe, she outlived Jack and Bobby, and her mother Rose. In her later decades, The surviving Kennedys brought her back into the family. Visits to Hyannisport, holidays with nieces and nephews who treated her not as a secret, but as a beloved aunt. The nuns of St. Coletta cared for her to the end. On January 7, 2005, Rosemary Kennedy died of natural causes at a hospital in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. She was 86 years old. Her sisters and her brother Ted were at her side, a bitter mirror of the decades when almost no one was. She was the first of Joe and Rose Kennedy's 9 children to be born with nothing asked of her, and the only one asked to disappear. The family that became America's loudest voice for the vulnerable had, in its own house, silenced its most vulnerable member, and then spent 20 years pretending she didn't exist. Rosemary Kennedy never wrote a book, never gave a speech, never told her own story. The surgery made sure of that. But her life reshaped American history anyway. Through the Special Olympics, through her family's later crusades for disability rights, through the simple, damning fact of what was done to her, the Kennedys erased her to protect their legacy. In the end, she quietly became one of the most important parts of it. Thanks for watching channel. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.